All right, everybody, welcome back to this episode, part 2 of New England Road Talk with Marc Valenti, manager of operations for the town of Lexington. Marc, thanks for sticking with us here for part 2. I know it was a great conversation last time, so we want to make sure that we finish up and try to get all the answers to all of our questions, because this is not our wheelhouse, but it's really, really interesting stuff. And I'm sure a lot of people that are tuning in have some interest in this and want to learn some more stuff. So Bobby, I know we were talking about supply chain and how that's affected things. I know you wanted to start out and continue into that conversation.
Yeah, so obviously, I think right now everyone knows supply chain everything. We got through the holidays, couldn't find anything. There's nothing on the shelves, and you mentioned on the trucking, but I think from a salt perspective, and some of our winter products, we've been hearing for the last 3, 4, 5 years about supply chain issues and concerns with that. And so I guess, could you talk a little bit more on that from a multi-year approach, and then also from a, this year, what you're seeing in terms of supply chain and options and that side of things?
Yeah. So I think if we're going multi-year, I've been trying to avoid saying the word COVID, but, multi-year though. So there were some really, really challenging issues, especially not necessarily here in New England, but here in other parts of the country. For us, we're fortunate that we're on the water, so our supply chain for salt is actually very good because it comes by boat, and we don't necessarily, well, at least in Eastern Mass. In Western Mass, it actually comes by boat there and by rail. But we've been fortunate in the way that everything comes by boat. Now, there have been challenges with some boat issues in supply chain. We all know about that. But there were some salt mines that had some real issues with COVID, and the salt mines shut down. And the salt mines don't even do they don't do as much production when you start talking about these huge strip mines that might be in South America, Mexico, which is where a lot of our salt comes from in this area. 25, 30, 50,000 tons per ship come into Boston area or into the New York area, while, they're making 400 tons a day to 600 tons a day at a salt mine in Michigan, or a salt like out there, because that's all they can produce. So those are always an issue. So if it's a bad season and you can't stay ahead of your supply, that's where everybody's been talking about. And this is where, unfortunately, sometimes the news grabs something and runs with it, not necessarily giving you the full breakdown of what it's talking about. Like I said, for us and our salt suppliers, they've been great. And for us, we are actually very, very careful about how we keep our salt sheds stocked. If we use a little bit, we'll order some eventually, but we're always trying to stay on top of it and stay ahead of it. And I think it's the same thing for you guys too. If you drop below 50% with your AC, you're going to wait till it goes to 25%. You're going to put an order in at 50% and say, okay, I need to refill. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It's like you got to manage your supplies, and that's where we do it. In the salt reduction program that we've had, like, we're down 40%. That means that we can stretch our salt that much more. So we're kind of helping ourselves with the supply chain issue, but with the liquid side of things, that all comes, some of the stuff that we get is specialized, and sometimes it comes by truck from like Pennsylvania. Well, it's hard to find a tanker to come from Pennsylvania these days. Every once in a while, we got to get that, and it's hard. And that's where we've been seeing challenges. And, that's tough. That is tough for us. We had an issue with finding bag salt. We wanted to actually have the organic sprayed onto the bag salt, and they said that they can't staff the bagging facility to make the product.
What made you move in the direction of the brine and the liquids? I mean, there's probably a lot of listeners out there who haven't even started looking into this, and so just kind of stepping back a little bit. Yep. What made you guys even want to get into this? Was it, just some education that you got that it was a better process, or what was there a need? Was it, salt costs, things like that?
Yep. Great question. Number one, yes. It's another tool in the toolbox. You can't have enough tools in the toolbox. We all know that by everything that we do every day. You can't always rely on one thing. And for us, those little tiny storm events, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, black ice, salt brine takes care of that. Like, we can apply product the day before we get 1/2 inch of snow, and we can sleep through the night, and we can staff it, but we may only need to reapply 100 pounds per lane mile at the end, because in theory, we already have 110 pounds on the pavement. Again, that's part of it, is education. I got educated at the snow and ice show, and I just kept on learning and learning and learning. And I said, wow, this is a real benefit for us. And as we started going heavily with the salt brine, we saw a reduction in our rock salt that was being used every year. So again, that's easier on the bank account. It's easier on the environment. We all know MS4 is going to be looking at measuring salinity very quickly. And I think everybody in this group has probably already heard of one community or another that's had a spike somewhere when they've been testing their wells. And we all know that in New England, there's multiple locations around New England that have had water wells shut down due to the brackish water. And talking to somebody recently, they said they found some saltwater vegetation growing in the middle of Massachusetts. Well, how was that happening?
It's a mess. Go ahead, Art.
No, I was just going to say, dirt roads, Mark. Do you have any dirt roads in Lexington, or do you have any experience with dirt roads and how you treat those differently from your pavements?
We do have dirt roads in Lexington. We actually got quite a few, believe it or not. We actually maintain them. We grade them out. We regrade them at least 2-3 times a year. We don't necessarily put as much salt brine on them as we would on the other roadways. That's something where, composite plow blades might not necessarily work depending on which plow blade you have. You got to be really, really careful, because I was talking earlier about the peeling power in your attack angle on your plow blade and how that edge grabs that pavement. You got to be careful, because, you could have a constant issue of the plow blade tripping if you aren't on top of keeping the equipment set up for dirt roads. But we do treat them with rock salt, and those spreaders that we have. Like I said, we have one conventional salt spreader left. The rest of them are all slurry spreader tech, and it works well. But again, it's just cutting down on how much product you're putting out there. That has always been.
I was just going to ask you, do you have any recommendations on those dirt roads to prevent any refreeze? I know application rate is huge when it comes to, using water on the roads, and you don't want to get a refreeze.
Yeah, what we're doing now is working on the dirt roads. If you get into some higher altitudes and you're going out Central Mass and Western Mass, I know that there's a lot of people that are spraying calcium and mag on their salt out there. And, there's probably some reasons why. If you're on dirt, that could be working. The only thing I can say about calcium and mag is, you put it down when it's a little too warm, and you're gonna create a slick issue, so that's something. Now, if you're using it as an additive and you're maybe throwing 10-15% into salt brine and you're putting that down on a dirt road, you're not going to get a slick issue, because you got to remember, you still got 80 or 85% salt brine. And out of that salt brine, 76%, was initially water. So you're not going to really create an issue. And on top of that, Bob, you can probably chime in, calcium and mag is by concentration. So that's also, it's a solid that's suspended in a liquid. Sometimes they use a little bit of salt brine in there to help keep it suspended, or you just have straight water. And it's, again, it's all, if you dilute it out enough, you probably won't have a problem. And again, it's like, it's all based on what you're dealing with, and elevation changes. I talk to Mike Heath all the time. Mike used calcium out there I'm sorry, Mike Smith out in Heath used calcium a lot, but his elevation is so much more different than what we have here. We're close to the ocean. They weren't close. They're closer to Vermont,
Right.
And that's where, just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for everybody else though too. And that's something that, like, I always gotta, like, okay, well, what do you have for conditions? What are you dealing with? And what's working, what's not working? And then you try and pick apart that problem and see if there's a challenge that they can overcome. It's, everybody's different.
Yeah,
I think that's good advice.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. We talk about it on the pavement side all the time. In terms of right road, right time, right treatment, and that. And I think it's no different than what you're talking about. And you get into more of the Eastern Mass versus you get into into the hills of Worcester or Western Mass, or never mind go up into Vermont, New Hampshire, and there's just a lot of different scenarios and figuring out what works. But the key, like you said, is looking at the different tools in the toolbox and where can you introduce some of these different options in that may work, or even within a town. Some areas of town may work better with one thing versus another. So
Right.
I think that's a great point.
Right. And just to circle back too with the organics, the organics they're a natural corrosion inhibitor as well. They also help take the edge off of the chlorides, especially on the environmental side of things. The only challenge that we're always balancing is, again, and it goes back to everything in moderation, too much organic, you'll get slime. You'll get green algae. It will suck the oxygen out of the water, and then you're dealing with that issue. So it's doing your homework, talking to the people that are using it right now, figuring out what works best for you where you are. But I can say, like, there are some people that are using 20% out in the western part of out in the West and Midwest. We're using 10%. There are some people that are only using 5%, but then it's based on the concentration of the product. Is it really super potent? Is it diluted out? If it's diluted out, then 20% isn't going to be as bad. People want the corrosion inhibitor factor, or they want, like for us, we just want the residual factor. We want everything that we put on the pavement to last longer. We want to put out less salt. So that's why we use it. But if you over apply it, yeah, you could go sideways on the environmental side of things, and you could suck the oxygen out of the water. And then, would you rather have brackish water, or would you have water with no oxygen? I guess now it's like, okay, well, those are the two extremities. You want to try and find everything in the middle. I always go back to one diagram that always seems to look right and always works out well when I'm trying to explain something. Everybody loves the word sustainability. Well, sustainability, there's a couple of different factors for something to be sustainable. There's the economic factor, then there's the social factor, and there's the environmental factor. I see sustainability smack dab in the middle of those three circles. Like, you can't, it's a relative term. You can't just say it's sustainable. Is it sustainable? Because I can tell you, putting out 500 pounds a lane mile is not a sustainable operation, because you're killing the environment. You're blowing through cash because you're trying to keep the salt shed, full. It's all relative. But like, that's where, again, what do you have to work with? What's your level of service? And like for us, like we all know there's different levels of service at every community. There's 351 levels of service here in Massachusetts by itself, right?
Yeah.
What are you expected to do?
Yeah. And I've I still have so many questions, but it's so one of the things that you were just touching on is the impact on the environment and how the winter operations impact the environment. We hear a lot of talk right now about climate change, and how do the winter operations impact the environment, putting down salt, and how is that related to like the MS4 permit that is obviously in full gear right now, and mitigating the impacts on your MS4?
So I know enough to be dangerous exactly with MS4 permitting. I am thankful that we have a great engineering staff that handles most of that. One thing that we have been doing for probably 3 to 4 years is providing the data to engineering in relation to the MS4 permitting when it comes to brine usage for the whole season, salt usage for the whole season. No different than how we report street sweepings and catch basin spoils. And we now have a baseline, and we can see a trend when we have a good season or a bad season. The only thing that scares me, Conrad, and again, it's all relative and what's your baseline. What I get scared with is if somebody's looking at that data and they don't realize that we had 3 or 4 ice storms. So now you talk about climate change. We are in a little bit of a funky pattern right now where, when we were kids, did we always see ice storms here in the New England area? Rarely did you see ice storms. Like, we didn't see that. When you start talking about dealing with an ice storm on the pavement, there's only one way to deal with the ice storm, and that is to try and plow it off the pavement as quickly as possible and treat the hell out of it. You got to try and stay ahead of it. So if you're putting out 250 pounds per lane mile, now you're putting out 500 pounds per lane mile because it's falling as ice. And as soon as it hits the pavement, it's melting. And if you don't get it off the pavement right away, you got to damn well keep it slushy. Otherwise, you're going to have pack that's going to be inches thick, and it's going to be like you're running the ice through a screed in a paver. So for us, you look at that, like, we had a season where we were doing great, and we literally doubled our consumption of salt because we had 3 ice storms in a period of a week. We went from trending 50% under consumption, and then all of a sudden 3 events put us over our consumption.
So you were talking earlier about how you see as part of this needing to bring down the levels of use of chloride.
Yeah.
So how do you think that is going to impact your operations moving forward?
Well, the key components of reducing salt usage is, number one, to calibrate the equipment. So that's the best way to combat that. And as long as you keep everything calibrated, you're going to know exactly what you're doing and what you're putting on the pavement. And it doesn't have to be really fancy. There's some great technique out there that can be done with a very simplistic salt spreader. I actually helped somebody calibrate a salt spreader that had a pony motor on the back. Like, you can do this, and it's totally doable. You need a stopwatch, you need a scale, and you need a pen and a paper, and that's it. And you can do this. Calibration in education are what's going to help bring the, help with the chloride reduction programs. I just, and again, going back to the MS4, it's like, if people are continuously getting hits and they're getting brackish water and they're not near the ocean, it's pretty easy to figure out what the brackish water is coming from. Now, there's also filtration systems, they use salt as a water softener too, but we know that's, you can rule that out. But I mean, the town engineer told us that they've been looking at it, and he's like, I got to give John a lot of credit. John's very heavily involved in MS4, and John is always trying to stay on the cusp of what, EPA is looking at and what they're looking at in the future. And John said he saw discussions of them potentially requiring us to measure salinity soon. Well, soon in EPA standards is what, 3 years, 5 years? I don't know.
Well, it could be
tomorrow.
It could be 10 years from now, right? Yeah, I mean, you don't know until the requirement comes out.
But there's a reason why, you know,
Right.
and that's like, and I think, and I mean, not for nothing, but you know, somebody just sent me a newspaper article this morning from the Washington Times. The Washington Times just had an article about, you know, overuse of chlorides. And, you know, they were referencing some stuff from Maryland. I know that Chesapeake Bay area is under, they're under huge restrictive, you know, applications now because of something that's going on down there. The lake area, Minnesota, there's a section of Illinois that's got some issues. I know that I think there's a section up in Vermont that has some issues. Like it's not like it's just popping up and it's like, oh, well, what's this? It's been going on for a while. I think unfortunately we're just kind of catching up. But you know, on the downside, we need to be mobile. We need to be mobile here. Like there's, you know, like stopping interstate transport from happening will cost billions of dollars if we don't keep those roads open. And there are some people that are like, well, you know what, the road's got to be black and wet. Well, the road doesn't have to. I don't know. I mean, it's a very, very touchy subject. Everybody's got a different level of service, you know, and you know, it's about safety, and you got to balance it out between what's safe and what isn't, you know. We installed a friction sensor here in Lexington. So we have road temperature and friction 24/7, 365 that, you know, it's an infrared sensor that shoots the pavement and gives us real-time friction. And we know if it's wet, dry, chemically wet, icy, or snowy, which is pretty cool tech. And it's not that expensive. Mass DOT has it too. And it's great technology. It's RWIS, Road Weather Information Systems. Just about every DOT, and that, let me see, I think there's 30 or 32 DOTs that are experiencing like weather events, winter weather events.
Yep.
Most of them have that data, and that coupled with a good forecasting system, coupled with a good program, good SOPs, that's like your winter operations program is not just, okay, throw the plows on, guys, let's go. Like I'm looking at weather data, I'm looking at my RWIS data, I'm looking at, okay, what do we have, you know, and then I'm looking at pre-storm, I'm looking at during the storm, I'm looking at post-storm, and, you know, we have go, no-go sheets for whether or not we're putting product down before the storm, or we're not putting it down before the storm. So there's a lot more to it. And have we made it a little bit more complex? We have, but we've ultimately saved a ton of money, and we've been able to enhance the level of service with spending less money.
So I only have one more question, and obviously you guys chime in if you got anything else, but I get asked this all the time. So I want to know from your perspective, how does salt affect the roadways in terms of deterioration of the roadways?
So salt does affect Portland cement concrete in its first year of curing if it is over applied. I have not seen anything on asphalt cement concrete. Haven't seen anything. I am working on a project with Washington State University with the winter research lab that they have out there. All of the data I've seen is everything is surrounded with Portland cement concrete. So thankfully, we don't have a lot of that here in the area. But I will definitely follow up with them and ask them what's going on with asphalt. But I mean, you know, again, I go back to what we've done here, and, you know, we got some good baseline data. You know, we've gone heavy on the the liquids program side of here, and our roads are still improving. Then again, we are spending a lot of money though too to keep them in good shape. But but I will check into that, and I will definitely let you know what I find out. But I know, I mean, Portland cement concrete's a whole other animal. Portland cement concrete in its first year of curing does not like chlorides at all.
Gotcha.
And unfortunately, there's really solid data out there that magnesium chloride eats away at it on a microscopic level. So you don't necessarily see it right away, but then all of a sudden you see like real degradation over a period of years. It takes a little while. So, light applications of sodium chloride and light applications of calcium chloride have been what are talked around in my circle of what's acceptable for Portland cement concrete in its first year. But again, it goes back to light application rates, and like, again, you don't know what you're putting. If you don't know what you're putting down, you don't know if you're putting down heavy or light. But somebody may think they're putting down as light, may be heavy, because what they're initially putting down is super heavy. So, but we're dealing with that right now downtown, Conrad. So we have taken over the applications of all the new concrete sidewalks in town.
Gotcha.
So we're currently doing that, and we've calibrated the salt spreaders and the walk behind spreaders, and we've literally calibrated everything, and we're staying on top of that because it's going to be a year before we can get back out there and not have to worry about it.
All right. Well, I know I've personally learned a lot during this conversation. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Mark, for joining us. Thanks for sharing your expertise in the winter operations. And with that, I'll close out this episode of New England Road Talk. Thanks for joining us. And on behalf of Bobby and Art, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark.